I hadn't planned on falling in love that summer, but then again, I hadn't planned on a lot of things. The moment I stepped out of my rented Kia and onto the gravel driveway of Aunt Maggie's lakeside cabin, the humid air hit me like a warm, wet blanket. It wrapped around me, sticking to my skin and frizzing up my carefully straightened hair. Welcome to Crystal Lake, Georgia, where the tea was sweet, and apparently, so was the air. Well, butter my biscuit. If it isn't little Natalie Harper all grown up and cityfied. Aunt Maggie's voice rang out from the porch where she stood wiping her hands on a dish towel, a wide grin splitting her face. I couldn't help but smile back as I lugged my oversized suitcase from the trunk. Hi, Aunt Maggie. It's good to see you. And it was. Even though I hadn't visited in years, even though I'd been reluctant to accept her invitation to spend the summer here, away from my fast-paced life in Atlanta. But after the year I'd had, the missed promotions, the failed relationship, the niggling feeling that I was running myself ragged on a hamster wheel to nowhere, well, maybe a summer by the lake was exactly what I needed. Aunt Maggie enveloped me in a hug that smelled of vanilla and sunscreen. Lord, child, you're thin as a rail. Don't they feed you in that big city of yours? I laughed, extricating myself from her embrace. They do, but not like you do, Aunt Maggie. Nobody cooks like you. She preened at the compliment, ushering me inside. Well, you just wait till you taste what I've got cooking for supper. But first, let's get you settled in. You remember where the guest room is? I nodded, hefting my suitcase. The cabin hadn't changed much since my childhood summers here. The same patchwork quilt adorned the back of the worn leather sofa. The same collection of mismatched mugs hung from hooks in the kitchen. It was like stepping back in time, to a simpler era before smartphones and social media and the constant pressure to be on all the time. As I unpacked, I could hear Aunt Maggie puttering around in the kitchen, the clang of pots and pans a comforting soundtrack. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and lake water drifting through the open window. Maybe this summer wouldn't be so bad after all. I'd just finished hanging up the last of my clothes when Aunt Maggie called me down for dinner. The table was laden with all my childhood favorites: fried chicken, okra, mac and cheese, and a blueberry cobbler cooling on the counter. Aunt Maggie, this is too much, I protested, even as my mouth watered. She waved me off. Nonsense. You need some meat on those bones. Now sit down and tell me all about your fancy job in Atlanta. So I did. I told her about my position as a junior executive at a marketing firm, about the long hours and the demanding clients. I told her about the promotion I'd been passed over for, twice now, and the nagging suspicion that no matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough. Aunt Maggie listened, her brow furrowing in concern. Sounds to me like you're working yourself to the bone, honey. When's the last time you did something just for fun? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Fun? Between work and my failed attempts at a social life, fun had become a foreign concept. That's what I thought, Aunt Maggie said, nodding sagely. Well, that's what this summer is for. You're going to relax, enjoy the lake, and maybe even make some new friends. I smiled, not wanting to disappoint her. But inside, I wondered how I was supposed to relax when my inbox was probably filling up as we spoke, when my colleagues were likely getting ahead while I was here eating fried chicken and reminiscing about childhood summers. After dinner, I helped Aunt Maggie clean up, then excused myself to check my emails. There were already dozens, each marked urgent, each demanding my immediate attention. My fingers itched to respond, to prove that even on vacation, I was dedicated and reliable. Natalie? Aunt Maggie's voice floated up the stairs. Some of the neighbors are having a little get-together down by the lake. Why don't you go on down and say hello? I glanced at my laptop, then out the window where the sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Work could wait, couldn't it? Just for one night? Sure, Aunt Maggie, I called back. I'll head down in a minute. I changed into a sundress and sandals, ran a brush through my hair, and headed out. The path to the lake was overgrown, but muscle memory guided my feet. As I approached, I could hear laughter and the strumming of a guitar. A small group had gathered around a bonfire on the beach. Some faces I recognized from childhood summers, now older and lined with laugh wrinkles. Others were new to me. "Well, look who it is," a familiar voice called out. I turned to see Mrs. Johnson, my old Sunday school teacher, waving me over. "Natalie Harper, as I live and breathe. Come on over here, sugar, and let me get a look at you." I made my way through the group, accepting hugs and how do you do's from old acquaintances. Mrs. Johnson pulled me down next to her on a log by the fire. "My, how you've grown," she said, patting my hand. "Your Aunt Maggie says you're some big shot in Atlanta now." I laughed, feeling my cheeks heat up. "I wouldn't say big shot. I'm just—" "Don't let her fool you," a deep voice cut in. "I hear she's taking the business world by storm." I looked up to see a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with broad shoulders and an easy smile that made something flutter in my chest. His eyes, reflecting the firelight, seemed to dance with amusement. "Tom Cooper," he said, extending a hand. "I don't think we've had the pleasure." I took his hand, noting the calluses on his palm. "Natalie Harper, nice to meet you." "Tom here runs the marina," Mrs. Johnson supplied. "And he's the best fishing guide on the lake, aren't you, Tom?" Tom shrugged, his smile turning sheepish. "I do all right." There was something about his laid-back demeanor that both intrigued and unsettled me. In my world, everyone was always rushing, always competing. Tom seemed content, like he had all the time in the world. As the night wore on, I found myself relaxing. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional splash from the lake. Tom, I discovered, had a wicked sense of humor and a knack for storytelling that had everyone in stitches. It wasn't until my phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder of the world I'd left behind, that I realized how late it had gotten. I pulled it out, wincing at the number of missed calls and messages. "Everything okay?" Tom asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff. Nothing that can't wait till morning." But even as I said it, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the worry that I was falling behind, that I was letting people down. I stood up, brushing sand from my dress. "I should probably head back," I said, hating how reluctant I sounded. "It was great meeting everyone." Tom stood too. "I'll walk you back. These paths can be tricky in the dark." I wanted to protest that I knew these paths like the back of my hand, but something in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I nodded. "Thanks. That'd be nice." We said our goodbyes and set off down the moonlit path. The sounds of the party faded behind us, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the soft lapping of the lake against the shore. "So," Tom said after a moment, "big shot from Atlanta, huh?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Hardly, I'm just driven, ambitious, married to your job." He supplied, a teasing lilt to his voice. I stopped walking, turning to face him. "Is that what people are saying about me?" Tom held up his hands in surrender. "Hey, I'm just going off what I've seen tonight. You've checked your phone at least a dozen times and you look like you're about to bolt every time it buzzes." I felt a flash of irritation. Who was he to judge me? Some of us have responsibilities, you know. We can't all spend our days fishing and telling stories around a campfire. As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Tom's easy smile faded, replaced by a look of, was that disappointment? "You're right," he said softly. "Some of us can't, but some of us choose not to." We walked the rest of the way in silence, the weight of my words hanging between us. When we reached Aunt Maggie's cabin, I turned to thank him, but he was already heading back down the path. "Good night, Natalie," he called over his shoulder. "Hope you find what you're looking for this summer." I watched him disappear into the darkness, a strange ache in my chest. Then I went inside, climbed the stairs to my room, and opened my laptop. There was work to be done, after all. But as I sat there, staring at the glowing screen, Tom's words echoed in my mind. Some of us choose not to. What did that mean? And why did it bother me so much? I closed the laptop without responding to a single email. For the first time in years, work could wait. I had a feeling this summer was going to be more complicated than I'd anticipated. Certainly. I'll continue the story from where we left off. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birdsong and sunlight streaming through the gauzy curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, reaching for my phone to check the time. Then I remembered where I was and why I was here. Crystal Lake. A summer of relaxation. Right. I padded downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. Aunt Maggie was already up, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. Morning, sunshine? She chirped. Sleep well? I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Like a log. I'd forgotten how quiet it is out here. Aunt Maggie chuckled. That's the beauty of lake life, honey. No sirens, no traffic, just the sound of nature. As we ate breakfast on the porch, watching the mist rise off the lake, I felt a twinge of guilt. I should be checking my emails, touching base with the office. But the thought of opening my laptop felt wrong, somehow. Like it would shatter the peace of this moment. So, what's on the agenda for today? Aunt Maggie asked, refilling my coffee cup. I shrugged. I should probably do some work. Aunt Maggie tisked. Natalie Harper, you did not come all the way out here to sit in front of a computer. Why don't you take the kayak out? The lake's beautiful this time of morning. The idea was tempting. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for the fun of it. I don't know, Aunt Maggie. It's been years since I've kayaked. I'm not sure I remember how. It's like riding a bike, she assured me. You never really forget. Go on now. That work will still be there when you get back. Before I could protest further, she was shooing me down to the dock, a life jacket in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. I had to admit, as I pushed off from the shore, that this beat staring at spreadsheets. The lake was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I paddled lazily, enjoying the sun on my face and the gentle lapping of water against the kayak. It was peaceful, quiet in a way that soothed something deep inside me that I hadn't even realized was frayed. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the other boat until it was almost upon me. A familiar voice called out, "Ahoy there, city girl." I looked up to see Tom, grinning at me from a small fishing boat. My cheeks heated as I remembered our conversation from the night before. "Fancy meeting you out here," he said, cutting his engine to drift alongside me. "Aunt Maggie's orders," I admitted. "She thinks I need to relax." Tom's eyes twinkled. "Smart woman, your Aunt Maggie. How's that relaxing going for you?" I was about to give a flippant answer, but something made me pause. "You know," I said slowly, "it's actually nice. I'd forgotten what it feels like to not be in a rush." "That's the magic of the lake," Tom said, his voice soft. "It has a way of slowing everything down, making you see what's really important." I looked at him then, really looked at him. In the morning light, I could see the laugh lines around his eyes, the easy set of his shoulders. He looked happy, content in a way I couldn't remember feeling in years. "Listen," he said, breaking into my thoughts. "I'm heading out to check my fishing lines. Want to come along? I could use an extra pair of hands." My first instinct was to say no. I had work to do, emails to answer. But then I thought about Aunt Maggie's words. The work would still be there when I got back. "Sure," I heard myself say. "Why not?" Tom's grin widened. "That's the spirit. Hop on over." It took some maneuvering and a lot of laughter to get me from the kayak to Tom's boat without capsizing either one. But soon enough, I was settled on the worn bench seat, the kayak trailing behind us as Tom steered us towards his favorite fishing spot. The morning passed in a blur of sunlight and laughter. Tom taught me how to bait a hook, which was both gross and oddly satisfying. How to cast a line. I nearly took out his eye on my first try. And how to reel in a fish. Harder than it looks, let me tell you. By the time we headed back to shore, I was sunburned, smelly, and happier than I'd been in months. We'd caught enough fish for a proper fry-up, and Tom insisted on teaching me how to clean them. "Can't have you relying on the supermarket for your fish forever," he teased as he demonstrated how to scale and fillet our catch. I wrinkled my nose at the mess, but gamely gave it a try. It was messy work, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. This, I thought, was about as far from my corporate job as I could get. As we worked, Tom told me about growing up on the lake, about taking over the marina from his dad, about the joy he found in introducing city folks like me to the pleasures of lake life. "Don't you ever want more?" I asked, genuinely curious. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is beautiful, but don't you ever feel like you're missing out on opportunities? Tom was quiet for a moment, his hands steady as he worked. "I used to," he admitted. "Went off to college, got a business degree, had a job lined up in Atlanta and everything." I blinked in surprise. "What happened?" He shrugged. "Came home for the summer before I was supposed to start. Spent some time out on the lake, helping my dad with the marina. And I realized this was where I was happiest. This was where I felt like I was making a difference, you know? Helping people reconnect with nature, with themselves." I nodded, understanding despite myself. "So you stayed." "So I stayed," he agreed. "And I've never regretted it. Sure, I don't have a corner office or a fancy car, but I've got this." He gestured at the lake, the trees, the sky. "And that's enough for me." His words stayed with me long after we'd said goodbye. Promises to meet up for the community fish fry that weekend ringing in my ears. As I walked back to Aunt Maggie's cabin, fish in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside me. The rest of the week passed in a similar fashion. Mornings on the lake, afternoons exploring the town or helping Aunt Maggie in her garden. I checked my work emails, of course. Old habits die hard. But I found myself spending less and less time on my laptop. Instead, I found myself drawn to the rhythms of lake life. The early morning mist on the water, the lazy afternoons reading on the porch, the evenings spent chatting with neighbors, everyone drawn to the lake shore as if by magnetic force. And always, there was Tom. He seemed to pop up everywhere, offering to teach me how to water ski, inviting me to a bonfire on the beach, showing up with fresh fish just when Aunt Maggie was wondering what to make for dinner. I told myself it was just friendship, just two people enjoying each other's company. But I couldn't deny the way my heart skipped a beat when he smiled at me, or the warmth that spread through me when our hands brushed as we walked along the shore. It was on one such evening walk, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold, that my phone buzzed with an incoming call. My boss's name flashed on the screen. "I should take this," I said apologetically, already reaching for the phone. But Tom's hand on my arm stopped me. "Natalie," he said softly, "look around you. Look at the sunset. Is whatever's on that phone more important than this moment, right here, right now?" I looked at him, then at the beauty surrounding us. For the first time, I let the call go to voicemail. "No," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "No, it's not." Tom's smile was like the sun coming out. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "Then let's enjoy this moment." As we stood there, watching the sun sink into the lake, I felt something inside me shift and settle. For the first time in years, I felt truly present, truly alive. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, but this time I didn't even notice. I was too busy living in the moment, my hand in Tom's. The beauty of Crystal Lake spread out before us. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how I'd reconcile this newfound peace with the demands of my career. But in that moment, with the sun setting and Tom's hand warm in mine, I knew one thing for certain. I had found something here at Crystal Lake, something I hadn't even known I was missing. And whatever happened next, I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. The next morning, I woke to the insistent buzzing of my phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages, all from work. With a sigh, I realized I couldn't put it off any longer. I slipped out onto the porch, phone in hand, and dialed my boss's number. The conversation was brief, but intense. A crisis had erupted with our biggest client. They needed me back in Atlanta, immediately. My vacation was being cut short. As I hung up, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. The peace I'd found here at Crystal Lake suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble about to burst. Aunt Maggie found me there, staring out at the lake. One look at my face, and she knew. "They're calling you back, aren't they?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She sighed, patting my hand. "Well, honey, you've got to do what you've got to do. But remember, there's always a choice." Her words echoed in my mind as I packed my bags, as I said goodbye to the neighbors, as I drove to the marina to find Tom. He was there, working on a boat engine, his face lighting up when he saw me, then falling as he took in my expression and the car keys in my hand. "You're leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, tears pricking at my eyes. "There's an emergency at work. They need me back." Tom was quiet for a long moment, wiping his hands on a rag. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "Do you want to go?" The question caught me off guard. Did I want to go? A week ago, I wouldn't have hesitated. My job was everything to me. But now, I don't know, I admitted. But I have to. They're counting on me. Tom stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Natalie, who's counting on you here?" I thought about Aunt Maggie, about the neighbors who'd welcomed me so warmly, about Tom and the connection we'd forged, about the peace I'd found, the version of myself I'd rediscovered here by the lake. "It's not that simple," I whispered. "Isn't it?" Tom challenged gently. "You've spent your whole life doing what you think you should do. Maybe it's time to do what you want to do." I closed my eyes, feeling torn. The ambitious part of me was screaming to get back to Atlanta, to prove myself, to climb that corporate ladder. But another part, a part that had awakened here at Crystal Lake, whispered of a different kind of success. Of a life measured not in promotions and paychecks, but in sunsets and laughter and love. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my phone and dialed my boss's number. "I'm sorry," I said when he answered, "but I won't be coming back. I quit." The words sent a shock through me, equal parts terror and exhilaration. I could hear my boss sputtering on the other end of the line, but I barely registered it. I was too busy watching the slow smile spread across Tom's face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as I hung up. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "No, I'm not sure about anything, except that I want to stay here and figure it out." Tom's answering laugh was joyous. He swept me up in his arms, spinning me around right there on the dock. When he set me down, both of us breathless and giddy, he cupped my face in his hands. "Welcome home, Natalie," he murmured before leaning in to kiss me. As his lips met mine, with the sun warm on my skin and the lake sparkling behind us, I knew I'd made the right choice. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how I'd make a living or what challenges lay ahead. But I knew that here, in Crystal Lake, with Tom by my side and a community that felt like family, I'd found something worth more than any corner office. I'd found myself, and that was worth everything. Later that evening, as Tom and I sat on Aunt Maggie's porch, watching the fireflies dance over the lake, I felt a deep sense of contentment settle over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for once, that didn't scare me. It excited me. "So," Tom said, his arm warm around my shoulders, "what's next for Natalie Harper?" I smiled, leaning into him. "I don't know, but I can't wait to find out." As the stars came out over Crystal Lake, I knew one thing for certain. This summer hadn't gone according to plan. It had gone so much better. And the best part? It was only the beginning. If you enjoy heartwarming, inspirational Southern stories, then pick up a copy of Ernest Dempsey's latest novel, The Final Round, through the link in the description. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from Magnolia Crossing when they're uploaded. Thanks for watching.